Hello, friends. Welcome to a special episode of the Repro Film Podcast. I'm your host, Asha Dyer, fighting back against the assault on bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom by amplifying the work of filmmakers tackling a number of repro health topics on film. Repro Film is proud to be a community partner of the Cleveland International Film Festival, or CIF, as you'll hear me refer to it throughout this episode. Audiences at the festival, as well as our Repro periodical subscribers, will have access to this episode where I am thrilled to be in conversation with filmmakers of the 2021 documentary On the Divide. We all know how powerful films and documentaries are when it comes to changing hearts and minds through personal stories, giving audiences a glimpse into an issue where they can really put themselves in people's shoes. That is exactly what On the Divide does. The film follows the story of three Latinx people living in McAllen, Texas, who, despite their views, are connected by the most unexpected of places, the last abortion clinic on the US-Mexico border. As threats to the clinic and their personal safety mount, these three are forced to make decisions they never could have imagined. Mercedes, a tattooed Latina woman in her 30s who used to be involved in gangs, is now part of the pro-life church movement, embracing the support from the Christian Pregnancy Center located next door to the clinic. Denise, a young mother of four, volunteers at Whole Woman's Health of McAllen and helps guide women into the clinic, providing much-needed comfort and assistance. Protecting the entryway into the clinic is Ray, a Latino security guard in his late 60s who is fervent in his religious beliefs, but also deeply understands the plight of the women who arrive at the clinic. Their life decisions intertwine at this abortion clinic as they grapple with how their devotion informs their role in fighting for or against abortion rights. And let me tell you, after watching this film, there are some very unexpected moments in each of the characters' stories. So that synopsis I just read is not even the whole story. This topic couldn't be more timely right now, as we are on the precipice of seeing Roe v. Wade overturned. So I had the chance to speak with co-directors Maya Cueva and Leah Galant, who talked about making the film over 7 years, why they chose to highlight this particular community in the Rio Grande Valley, and why choice really is a matter of survival. Thank you, Leah and Maya, for speaking with me and joining with me today. I know we're all in different time zones. Leah, you're in Europe, and Maya, you and I are here on the West Coast. So thank you for taking the time. Now, On the Divide was released in 2021, yet it certainly feels very timely, maybe even more so today, given what is happening in the United States with abortion access, Supreme Court cases, and the ever-changing political landscape. Before we dive into the film and, the info about everything, I'd love to know how both of you are feeling about all of this in relation to your work promoting On the Divide.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having us. Excited to be here. Yeah, it's definitely a hard time. Unfortunately, what's happening right now in Texas, this has been happening for a long time. So, when we started filming in 2014, we saw that clinics were closing throughout the state and that access was already really dire there. So it's just really unfortunate that, for people in Texas and for people particularly on the border in McAllen, this is not a new reality, but it has gotten so much worse in terms of restrictive access. And it's hard to see, our rights being continue to be rolled back. And, Leah and I were born after Roe v. Wade was already a constitutional right. But it's just really devastating to see how, all of the restrictions are just making this so much worse. SB 8, staying in effect, which is the very restrictive abortion law that in Texas, which would prohibit patients from being able to get an abortion after 6 weeks, and would also criminalize, yes, and would also criminalize anyone who's trying to help assist, people from getting abortions. So we know who that's going to target, right? That's going to target Black and Brown organizers that are on the ground doing this work day in and day out to try to help secure access for people because there's such limited access and because, abortions are very expensive too in these areas. So it's really disheartening to see, the access, and how restrictive it's all still been and continuing to be.
Yeah.
I mean, Maya summed it up pretty great of how I'm also feeling. Although, yeah, I mean, for so long, again, as Maya said, these states, especially those in the South, have been ringing the alarm bell for years now, saying how hard it has been to access abortion. And I think something that even our protagonist, Denise, says in the film that we definitely want to highlight in watching this film is just because abortion is legal in all 50 states as of today, could change unfortunately at any minute, but it doesn't mean that it's accessible. So for us, this film really is highlighting the need for accessibility first and foremost, because again, these laws and legislation just disproportionately affect low-income communities of color the most. And that is what we're trying to highlight in this film with On the Divide.
Yeah, absolutely. That difference between legal and accessible is really being highlighted right now. So let's take it back to 2016, which feels like a lifetime ago, where the film begins and how we see the trajectory of your three main protagonists, mom and self-identifying pro-life advocate Mercedes, who at the beginning, calls herself a pro-life activist, mom of four pro-choice clinic escort Denise, and clinic security guard Ray. We see this play out over the following years under a Trump administration. How much did the political landscape in Texas at the time play a role in you wanting to make this film initially?
Actually, it was 2014 when we first started hearing about what was going on in specific states around abortion access. And we came across a few news articles actually that were highlighting the need for traveling abortion doctors. And Maya and I were kind of confused, why would a doctor have to perform a service that should be common and accessible? But then the more we looked into it, then we started uncovering the laws. And at the time, HB2 was just about to get passed. And I think there was a period where the clinics were closing and opening within a couple of months just based on this law. And that's when we started realizing that other clinics in not only in Texas, but other states in the South and across the Midwest were at risk of closing themselves. And so that's really what we walked into and what got us interested in even exploring this topic. And that's how we created our short film together called The Provider, which is about a traveling abortion doctor in Texas. And so while HB2 was going on, while we're following this doctor named Dr. Shannon Carr, we went down to McAllen and also to Brownsville in the Rio Grande Valley because we had heard that there was only one clinic in this entire region, which serves a very large population of people, and some of them are undocumented. And so if this clinic were to close, the next closest clinic is over 250 miles away in San Antonio, which is through border checkpoints. So many people who are undocumented would not want to risk deportation in order to go to that clinic. So in so many ways that this is the only option for an in-house in procedure inpatient abortion care in the Rio Grande Valley. So that's when we went down during a Women's March rally, and it was surrounding reproductive healthcare and healthcare in general. And that's when we met Denny and Melissa, who are the founders of South Texans for Reproductive Justice. And that's when we started talking about collaborating with them on the feature film that became On the Divide.
Yeah, and just to answer your question around the political landscape, when Leah and I went to McAllen, Leah and I both are not from the Rio Grande Valley, are not from Texas, right? And where we are from, access is not as restricted. But as soon as we got there, we just noticed how polarizing everything was as well. And we also have just been seeing, just from working on this film for so long, from The Provider to then On the Divide, that the real stories of people that are dealing with this every day kind of get lost in the shuffle of, are you this way, are you that way, are you anti-choice, are you pro-choice, are you pro-life, are you pro-choice? And we really wanted to focus on the people who are really on the front lines of this issue, right? And that we don't hear from every day. Like Ray, who's the security guard, who's a religious man, was religious his whole life, and was, as you see in the film, randomly assigned to work at the clinic and didn't know how he felt at first, right? But you really see how much his views have changed throughout the process. And Mercedes as well, just being a very complex person, and Denise too. These were stories that we had never really heard of when it came to stories around reproductive health care or news reports around reproductive health care. We kind of just saw the more reductive reports around this area, right? But we didn't really get to hear from people who are like the three of them. And we also saw that a lot of abortion films, documentaries about abortion that do a really great job of highlighting, restrictive laws or restrictive access and going inside the clinics. We didn't really see a lot of the coverage of people who are kind of on the outside and how does it affect their everyday lives. So that's why I really felt like this film was really urgent to make. And it was many different films at one point because we were filming for so long. We thought it was going to be about the Supreme Court case that was happening in 2016. And, we thought we were going to be following clinics around the country. And, but it really, once we really met these three people, we were able to really see, these are stories we'd never really heard of. And these are kind of like unconventional narratives and complex stories that we think that everyday people can relate to and everyone should hear from.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify for people listening who may not be familiar with HB2, it was a law that was signed by former Governor Rick Perry, I believe, back in 2015, 2014. And it basically put all these unnecessary restrictions on clinics in particular, like you have to have hallways that will fit a gurney down the middle, which they don't use. That's not something that they need. And you have to have access to hospitals or special relationships with hospitals, but abortion is so safe that patients aren't being sent to hospitals. So it placed this burden on these clinics and it forced so many clinics in Texas to close. It ended up going to a Supreme Court in 2016 and Whole Woman's Health won that case. And yet there are still very similar laws popping up that are basically copycat laws. There was one in Louisiana, which went to the Supreme Court last year, I believe. And it also lost because of the precedent set in 2016. But the fact that these laws are just ongoing, placing all these burdens. And I love what you mentioned about really honing down to who is affected the most, who are these providers, who are these people on the front lines, and that complexity that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, which isn't shown in media stories and news headlines. And with each of these characters, Mercedes, with Ray, with Denise, you really can't ever pigeonhole them or predict where they're going to end up. I remember, as I'm watching the film at the beginning thinking, all right, this is where this person fits. This is who Mercedes is. This is who Ray is. But they're so layered and so complex and they go on a journey. How important was it for you to show that nuance, which is often missing in, larger discussions about abortion, who gets abortions, who provides abortions, who is there, protecting people getting abortions?
Yeah, it was really, really important for us to show these complex stories, mainly because, again, just like you had said, we really never really thought of, people being able to be this complex around their views around abortion, right? We kind of always, I think I grew up always thinking like, oh, it's one way or the other, until I really was able to, be filming this community and seeing all the intersections, right, that come into play, right? This is a primarily Latino, Latinx community, right? And there's also a really large Catholic community, religious community. They're dealing with, like Leah had mentioned, border checkpoints, immigration. It has the largest detention center in this area. Also dealing with low-income communities as well, right? So there's just such a myriad of different issues that come into play here. And I think it was really important for us to be able to show, that we're not a monolith. As a Latina filmmaker myself, I'm like, we're not a monolith. We don't fit into one category, right? We all have different upbringings, different identities that kind of come into play when we make these decisions. So it was just really important for us to be able to show people that, don't fit neatly into these boxes. But ultimately, what you come to see is that, choice is really necessary for survival. And they're all kind of trying to figure out, how do they deal with these choices, right? And how do they deal and navigate with restrictive access in their everyday lives? So it was really important for us to be able to show that for people to see, to be able to see someone like Mercedes and Ray and Denise and be able to be like, I see myself in that, right? Or I see my family member like in that. And I understand that, these are everyday people that are just trying to survive and get through everything, right? And might have a few kids but be fighting for access to abortion, right? And be adamantly pro-abortion, but also understand that they have, if they want to have kids, they can have kids. It's so frustrating that this debate can become such one rigid way or the other, right? But there's so many people who want to fight for access and are also like, yeah, I have 4 kids at home too. It doesn't mean that I don't want to protect other people's right to choose or that I wouldn't ultimately make that choice at some point, right? Or you have Mercedes searching for community, and Ray as well, right? And who might be still religious but understands why choice is necessary. So yeah, again, it was really important for us to just really be able to show, it's just really not this rigid one way or the other.
Yeah, I love that intersectionality of all these characters, and there really is such a beautiful interweaving in their shared Latinx culture, their religious background, their love of family, and living in a part of Texas that really straddles the different cultures. Can we talk more about the message you wanted to show by focusing on this community in the Rio Grande Valley? Did I say that right? Rio Grande? Grande?
Yeah, people say different ways, like Rio Grande Valley or Rio Grande Valley. Yeah, I think it's sort of depends if you're saying it like in Spanish or in English.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, talk to me about focusing on the community and what you really want audiences to see by, showing that, like you said, that they can't be pigeonholed, but the importance of really highlighting this community.
Yeah, no, it was really important for us to highlight McAllen in particular because, this is the area that I had said earlier that we might see on the news and might be seen in a certain way, right? Can be, again, very reductive. Often the mainstream news kind of paints it in a certain way where there's like a border crisis happening, quote unquote, or, these are brown people who are struggling with poverty. And if they're talking about abortion, it's just like in this very like inflammatory, like talking about, how, and in many ways it's like trauma porn, how the news media can often depict this place. So we really wanted to be able to meet with community members and really be able to ask like, hey, what are some stories that you feel like aren't being told about your community, right? And what do you feel like is being ignored? And when we went down there, again, we had seen not only is there one abortion clinic, there's many border checkpoints along the way. There's the largest detention center. And we saw that there's so many intersections that come into play when we're talking about reproductive health care, because like Leah had mentioned, you have to travel really far to be able to get an abortion if this clinic were to close. And then people who are undocumented are risking deportation because of border checkpoints along the way, and they could be put into the detention center there, right? It's just like you're risking so much just to try to get access to proper reproductive health care that I think a lot of people aren't able to see or don't know about. And so we wanted to make sure too that, we weren't just coming in as outsiders and being like, hey, we know what the story is, and we're going to come in and try to find the story and just put our own views into what's happening here, right? We really made a point to talk to everyone, and organizers we met along the way, clinic workers, and really ask them, again, what's not being represented here. And a lot of them told us like, we'd never been asked that before. They're like, there have been reporters who've come in, and just are trying to chase that story, right? Chase the story that would make the headlines, or, you know, is the most quote unquote interesting for viewers to read. But they were like, no one had ever asked them, like, what do they think about this? And that was just so helpful for us to understand, you know, what it means, like what they're dealing with, and also like how important it is to build trust in communities that you're coming into and filming. So that's why it was really important for us to highlight this community and show how there's just so many different intersections at play here. And, you know, it's important to also talk about faith when it comes to abortion, and talk about, you know, how there's a lot of people who were raised religious and might not know how they feel about it now, right? Because of what they were taught. So how do we kind of also bring those people into the conversation around this?
I know one of the feelings that I had right from the moment the film opens and you're placed as an audience member outside the clinic, and you see the protesters and you see the clinic escorts and you see the security guard, and I started, you know, you feel anxiety from the minute the film opens. And I feel like that's something that people need to see more of. Like, this is the reality of people who work in these areas and who live in these communities and who need access, you know, to abortion, safe abortion, accessible abortion. Talk to me about some of the challenges during the years that you were filming. What were some of the things that were highlighted to you when you were following Mercedes, Ray, and Denise, and some of the other characters? What were some of the hurdles you came up against?
Maya and I absolutely learned so much making this film. We learned that, yeah, when we're talking about reproductive justice and access, we have to look at, as Maya said, all of the intersections of other elements and systems of oppression that would get in the way of somebody accessing an abortion. And I think also, again, why we wanted to highlight this community in particular is, if we're not listening to the organizers from communities such as McAllen and in the Rio Grande Valley, and we're not taking their lead of what they know they need and they're advocating for and what they want, then we're not going to get to a place where abortion is safe, legal, and accessible for all. And I do think that a lot of times, yeah, again, people come into the community and place narratives and expectations. But what was guiding us to was just listening to the stories that, again, we had never heard before. And also we kept asking throughout the production, Maya and I, would be, what are the stories that you feel are not being told, or what are the stories that you feel like are being ignored? So that was definitely working with those questions that would guide us with being able to film with all three of our protagonists. And then, other challenges that we faced were kind of more on the film production level of being two young women starting out in the industry that we're trying to get access to equipment, funds, and resources, and being able to go down and be able to film in McAllen. So that was absolutely a challenge. But I think mostly it was just a challenge, I think, finding and remaining hopeful when all of these pieces of legislation were just continuing to come, and why, again, we really turned to the work mostly of South Texans for Reproductive Justice and the incredible work that they had continued and were doing, despite, you see an election that happens in the film, you see another, Supreme Court nominee that is appointed, you see, the another president election. And so all of these things are happening over the course of 7 years. And it seems like it's getting harder and harder, which in some ways it is. And what we and I really wanted to find was hope of like the organizing work in this community that I think is unparalleled, and why we wanted to uplift these stories and make sure that it's highlighted and people are like not only handing over the mic, so to speak, but really like listening and advocating for the organizers in this region. So that, despite all the challenges, that was something that we were looking towards and in the production of the film, and to keep going despite our production challenges as well, and the news. So that's how we kept going.
I love that you mentioned the production challenges, because I think that's really important for, you know, filmmakers who are starting out and who really want to tell these important stories. I think it's great that you talk about that and are open about that, because at the end of the day, this film is so powerful and so timely. And, you know, congratulations and kudos to you for getting in there and doing that. So I think it's really great to talk about the filmmaking aspect of that as well, you know, being independent filmmakers. So yeah. And looking ahead to audiences watching the film during SIF and beyond, what do you want people to do after watching the film? How do you want them to feel? Or, you know, do you want people to stay hopeful despite the current situation? What are your thoughts for audiences after they watch On the Divide?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we definitely hope that this film can spark conversations with people across the aisle, right? So, you know, what would it mean to be able to watch this film and maybe show like a religious grandparent or something and be able to have that conversation that we don't normally get to have around the table, right? That's more hush hush in a lot of communities. But we also want to be able to, you know, like we want people to be able to see how important it is to have choice and have access to choice, right? You know, the reasons why we're showcasing people who are complex and don't fit in a box is to obviously show that, you know, personal choice is important. But it's also really important to understand why, you know, having access to choice and having that in place is so necessary for survival. Right. And we really are asking this question throughout the film, like, you know, what does choice even really mean if you don't have options? Right. And this is what's happening, continuing to happen. Unfortunately, you know, Roe v. Wade as a constitutional right is just the floor. You know, it's not the ultimate end all be all. Right. We see that even if we have Roe v. Wade secured, there still will be states that have restrictive access. So it's so important for people to understand that. Why choice is necessary, but also, even though this is a really hard time, you know, we, like Leah has said, we really look to, you know, the organizers on the ground. They give us a lot of hope. They're doing so much work, and we really hope that, you know, after people watch the film, that they're moved to, you know, look into some of these organizers and abortion funds that are on the ground really doing this work. And, you know, organizations like South Texans for Reproductive Justice, which is the organization of clinic escorts that you see in the film, like Denise is a part of that organization. And they also do a number of other really important work around reproductive health care, like giving out birth control and Plan B in communities. And there's also a number of other really important abortion funds, like Lilith Fund, La Frontera Fund is an organization in the Rio Grande Valley that are particularly helping patients there. So we really just hope that people look into that, donate, support, volunteer if you're in those areas. Yeah, it's just we really want people to be able to, you know, be mobilized after watching this film, but also really understand, you know, the complexities that come into play here, and that, yeah, we don't all fit neatly in a box.
I would just add to in the film, not to give anything away, but one of our main protagonists realizes that there's access to resources that she didn't know existed before. And that's another big part of our impact campaign and work too, is making sure people are directed and have more information about places where they can either find an abortion, get these abortion funds with the wonderful places that Maya had mentioned, or just if, you know, you're a person of faith that's been struggling with these thoughts, there are communities for you. And these communities include Catholics for Choice that we're partnering with. And so I think just being able to let people know that they're not going through this in isolation, and that there is community out there for them that's wanting to, you know, keep them safe and healthy, and not trying to manipulate them. I think that's really important for us for people to take away from this film. And then, of course, the impact campaign work that we're doing with Peace is Loud.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I hope people check out those organizations. They are very, very important now, more so than ever, but they're doing wonderful work. So where can people watch On the Divide beyond the Cleveland International Film Festival? What's the website? What are some screening dates? Is it going to be broadcast soon where people can watch?
Yeah, definitely. Put mark your calendars for April 18th, which is a Monday. And it's going to be streaming. Actually, it's going to be broadcasting on public television PBS with the program POV. And if you have access to your local PBS station, it should be free and accessible to those who are able to find a PBS station or online. It's streaming. So that's really exciting. And gearing up for that, we are going to have a mini theatrical release as well. So if you live in LA, New York City, Westchester County, New York, or the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, or Austin, Texas, we will be playing the film in a theater in those cities. So please make sure to follow us on onthedividemovie.com and check out the film, whether it's broadcast or theatrical. Or we also have a partnership with an educational distributor. So if you want to take it to your school or your university, then we would be happy to share the film with you through Good Docs as well. And then also we'll be updating on the website any upcoming film festival screenings, online film festivals where you can stream the film. And yeah, we're just really excited that everyone's going to get to watch the film very shortly.
Yeah, this is after 7 years of working on this film. We're just so excited to be able to actually have it be released in the world and hear what everyone has to say. We were able to premiere at Tribeca last year in 2021, and we got a standing ovation. It was just really incredible to be able to be in a live audience with people. And so we're so excited to be able to also go on this theatrical tour and take it to McAllen as well, where we'll be able to screen it with organizers there and just other people in the community. And you can also follow us on socials, on Instagram, on Twitter, just at On the Divide. So yeah, please stay in touch, watch the film, tell your friends.
All the good things.
All the good things. April 18th on PBS on POV.
Yeah, I'm very excited. And Leah and Maya, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope more people will watch this film and, like you said, start a conversation, share, and really help secure and keep access available to especially underserved communities. So thank you so much for your time today, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
To watch On the Divide and find a screening near you, head to onthedividemovie.com. Thank you to the Cleveland International Film Festival for inviting the Repro Film team to be a community partner this year. As always, you can sign up for our free monthly periodical featuring a short film and podcast, hosted by me, around an issue central to reproductive health and justice. Get on the list at reprofilm.org or follow us on our social media platforms at ReproFilm Official. We welcome people from anywhere to join us for the movie and conversation each month. You can also find the Repro Film podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Keep fighting the good fight, and I'll see you next episode.